the name of the one who gives us life, heals our hearts, and leads us to the light. Amen. Last week, I had one of those heart-to-heart talks with my 31-year-old son about the realities of his work-life balance. And in one of those rare moments of parental insight, I remembered a quote by Annie Dillard that I shared with him. "How we spend our days," she writes, "is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing." During this time of protracted pandemic, a time when we're a lot more aware of how we are spending our days and what we are or are not doing, I have taken Annie Dillard's words to heart. How does what I'm doing today, minute by minute, have anything to do with how I want to spend my life? What does it say about my sense of purpose, my values, my life's meaning? How does it reflect the love, kindness, justice, and peace of God? The point is, how we shape our mundane hours is how we shape our lives. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. In today's gospel reading from Mark, we are shown a day in the life of Jesus. As he begins his public ministry, we have a chance to follow him around for 24 hours, observing what he does, what he says, and what he prioritizes. What might we learn during this season of Epiphany and revelation from the way Jesus spends his days? Our gospel begins with Jesus leaving the synagogue after Sabbath worship and entering a home, the home of Simon and Andrew, and he spends the rest of his day in that domestic space. This might sound like a minor detail, but I love the fact that Jesus lingers at home, blessing a humdrum, everyday location with his presence and grace. We know from the rest of the Gospels that some of Jesus' most meaningful encounters happen in homes. He performs his first public miracle at a home in Cana. He raises Jairus' daughter in that synagogue leader's house. His friend Mary anoints him with oil at her home in Bethany. And the disciples on the road to Emmaus recognize the risen Jesus when he breaks bread at their dining room table. What we see here is that holy things happen in the places we call home. God's power and presence aren't limited to official sacred spaces. Our living quarters are not second best when it comes to seeking and finding the presence of God. If anything, Jesus delights in the domestic. For me, this delight is a particular comfort during these days of COVID when we are largely confined to our homes. For those of us who felt restless, trapped, and in limbo, as if real life has been suspended and nothing significant will happen until the world's lockdowns and quarantines are over, it might come as a relief to know that Jesus isn't put off one bit by the mundane and the everyday. He does awesome and holy work in spaces most of us would consider familiar and ordinary. What would it be like for us to honor our own homes as Jesus honors Simon's in our gospel reading? To elevate our living spaces as sites for the sacred. Some of you have already begun practicing that, as we've seen in our worship videos and on Zoom screens. This leads me to the next thing that Jesus does in his day, and that is to heal. Hearing that Simon's mother-in-law is feverish and bedridden, Jesus goes to her side, takes her by the hand, and lifts her up. Immediately, the fever leaves her body, and she is restored to health. Some hours later, the whole city gathers around Simon's door, and Jesus cares for them too, as a compassionate healer. I'll be the first to admit that I don't always know what to do with Jesus' healing stories, especially in the context of a global pandemic when the miracle of healing eludes so many. And yet I wonder how many times Jesus simply visited a sick person, took their hand and offered only the comfort of his presence without curing them. In today's gospel, we are told that Jesus heals many, but not all. He casts out many demons, not all. And the thing is, the not all doesn't stop him. He still touches or offers his presence to everyone who reaches out for help, because presence in and of itself is an instrument of hope and healing. Perhaps spending our days as Jesus spent them, healing as he healed, isn't to perform miracles, but to offer the comfort of our steady presence and compassion, and to encourage those who are suffering to hang on, because the work of redemption is an ongoing process. What is it that we can do to create and restore community, family, and dignity to those who do have to walk through life sick, weak, or wounded, whether or not there is a cure in sight? Think about the result of Jesus' actions in today's story, which is to restore Simon's mother-in-law to work that gives her purpose and meaning. We're told that as soon as she's healed, she begins to serve. Now, like many of you, I've struggled with the thought that this poor woman has to leap out of bed and serve the men in her house the second her fever leaves her. But I learned that the Greek verb Mark uses to describe this service is the same word, diakonia, that Jesus uses to describe himself. I am among you as the one who serves. It's the word that we use to describe our deacons in the church. In fact, Peter's mother-in-law is the first character in Mark's gospel to exemplify this kind of servant leadership. The point is, to the extent that we are invited to heal as Jesus healed, we are also invited to free others for their unique ways of serving God. We're invited to pay attention, no matter what the circumstances, to notice and to bless the gifts and the abilities of those around us. Like Jesus, can we spend our days restoring and empowering those who God has placed in our lives so that they can serve in gratitude and in love? The final two things that Jesus does with his day sort of pull all this together. After all his busyness, Jesus goes to a deserted place and prays. Here we see the source of his strength and vision and his need to withdraw, rest, recuperate, and reorient his heart. He needs time alone to let go with God. And so do we. In a culture where tireless striving is a virtue and the need for rest is considered a weakness, prayer can be a challenge. But how we spend our days with God is how we spend our lives with God. Lastly, and this is important, Jesus moves on. He leaves Simon's house so that he can take the good news of God's love to other towns and synagogues, to other homes. He makes this decision despite the fact that the disciples hunt him down and interrupt his prayer time to tell him that everyone is still searching for him. There are, no doubt, compelling reasons for Jesus to stay right where he is. But his response is to set a boundary, to say no, to move on in keeping with his own deep sense of mission and timing. That's a day in the life of Jesus. Home, healing, restoring, praying, letting go, moving on. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. May we, like Jesus, spend them well. Amen.